My stepdaughter said, "You're just a paycheck with shoes." I canceled every card linked to my name and let them pay for their own family vacation. The hotel called me first, asking who would cover the bill now. I was 46 when I married Rachel. She had 2 teenagers, Sophie, 16, and Eli, 15. I told myself this time would be different. A new house, a new family, a new chance to be something better than the man I had been before. I moved into their small, weather-stained home outside Seattle, where the fog hung low over the pines and the walls still whispered another man's name, their father's. He wasn't there anymore, but I could feel him, in the framed photos that Rachel hadn't yet taken down, in the offhand comments the kids made, in the way his ghost sat with us at dinner every night while I pretended not to notice. I brought my things in boxes, labeled and neatly packed, as if order could tame the chaos I was walking into. I replaced the squealing hinges, fixed the dripping sink, painted the porch. The house looked better within a week, but inside it, something remained crooked. Still, I tried. I thought if I gave enough, if I filled every crack with kindness and money, the house, and the people inside it would eventually feel like mine. Sophie wanted a new phone. I bought it. Eli wanted a gym membership. I paid for it. When the roof leaked that first winter, I climbed up there myself with a flashlight clenched between my teeth and patched it in the rain while they sat inside, streaming shows I was too old to understand. I thought love was a kind of persistence, that if you showed up long enough, the walls would eventually stop resisting you. Rachel told me they were just difficult teenagers, that time would change things. But time didn't change anything. It only deepened the distance. At dinner, the 3 of them spoke a private language I was never invited to learn. They told jokes from years before I arrived, half-finished memories that belonged to someone else's family. When I tried to join in, Sophie kept her eyes on her phone, her fork scraping the plate like a metronome marking my absence. Eli would mumble, "Yeah," or whatever without looking up. Rachel noticed, I think, but she didn't intervene. She just smiled softly and said things like, "Give them space," or "You're doing great." But I wasn't doing great. I was sinking. There were nights I sat in the driveway after work, engine idling, staring at the faint light in the kitchen window, wondering if I was ready to walk in again, wondering if they'd notice if I didn't. I told myself that patience was love, that silence was strength, that maybe fatherhood, in my case, meant disappearing behind what I provided. So I kept providing. When Sophie mentioned she wanted to take a photography class, I bought her the camera before she even asked. She thanked her mother, not me. When Eli needed new cleats for soccer, I drove across town to get the best pair, the ones the professionals wore. He posted a photo of them online with the caption, "Thanks, Mom." I laughed it off, pretending it didn't sting. But it did. Every act of generosity became a quiet humiliation. Every dollar I spent seemed to buy another layer of indifference. They saw me not as a man but as a utility, a machine that produced meals, money, and rides. Sometimes Rachel would touch my arm at night, whisper that she was proud of me, that I was making progress. She said it like I was taming wild animals, not raising children. And maybe that's what I was doing, trying to domesticate resentment. The more I gave, the colder they became. They never fought with me outright. They didn't need to. Their rejection was polite, civilized, bloodless. The quiet kind that rots you from the inside because it gives you nothing to fight against. On weekends, Rachel and the kids would go out, shopping, movies, errands, and I'd stay behind, fixing something that didn't need fixing. The fence, the gutters, the door frames. I needed to feel useful, because usefulness was the only proof that I existed in that house. One Sunday, while cleaning the garage, I found an old box labeled Family Photos. Inside were albums from years before me, birthdays, beach trips, holidays. Every picture framed by smiles that didn't include mine. I flipped through them like someone rifling through evidence of a crime that hadn't been reported yet. Rachel walked in, caught me staring. She said softly, "You're part of us now." But the way she said it sounded like a line she had rehearsed. I smiled, nodded, closed the box. That night, Sophie and Eli sat at the dinner table scrolling their phones, while Rachel talked about some show they all watched together. I didn't know the show, didn't understand the references. I tried to add something, a joke, a story from work, but it fell flat. Sophie rolled her eyes. Eli sighed, and Rachel, trying to keep the peace, changed the subject. I ate in silence. My fork scraping against the plate was the loudest sound in the room. After dinner, I washed the dishes while they laughed in the living room. Their laughter didn't include me either. It had a rhythm I didn't belong to. Sometimes I told myself it wasn't personal, that teenagers were just cruel without meaning to be, that this was a phase. But deep down, I knew better. They weren't rejecting fatherhood. They were rejecting me. There's a moment, every stepfather knows it, when you realize love is not something you can earn by effort. It's a border you were never meant to cross. For me, that moment came late one evening. Sophie had asked me to drive her to a friend's party across town. It was raining, the kind of cold, relentless rain that turned every streetlight into a smudge of gold on the windshield. I waited in the car when we arrived, not wanting to embarrass her by walking her up to the door. She hesitated before getting out, then turned to me and said, almost casually, "You don't have to pick me up later. Mom can get me." I told her it was no trouble. She gave a small, uncomfortable smile. Then, "It's just, my friends think it's weird. You know? You're not really." She trailed off. "Not really what?" I asked. She looked at me, her reflection flickering in the rain-speckled glass. "Not really my dad." Then she was gone, slamming the door before I could respond. I sat there for a long time, watching her walk up the driveway, her phone glowing in her hand like a small, separate world I would never be invited into. When I came home, Rachel was on the couch watching TV. She asked how the drive went. I said fine. I didn't tell her what Sophie had said. What would have been the point? It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even cruelty. It was simply the truth spoken without malice. And that made it worse. Later, as I lay in bed beside Rachel, I thought about what Sophie had said. Not really my dad. The words echoed like a verdict. I thought about the bills, the repairs, the weekends spent working overtime so I could keep up with their wants. Not just needs but wants, all the small luxuries that made their world smooth and effortless. And I realized that I was nothing more than an uncredited sponsor of their lives. A man funding a family that existed without him. The next morning, Eli came down to breakfast and asked if I could lend him $50 for a field trip. He didn't say please. He didn't look up when I handed it over. He said, "Thanks, Mom," as he walked out the door. Rachel laughed softly, said, "Don't take it personally." But I did. I took it personally because it was personal. Everything about this house was personal. Every sigh, every rolled eye, every small silence that told me I didn't belong. At night, I sat in the dark living room, listening to their laughter spill from upstairs, and told myself this was what love looked like. That one day, when they were older, they'd see what I'd done. They'd understand. But deep down, I knew better. Because every time I looked at them, I saw the truth I didn't want to face. I hadn't joined a family. I funded one. And in their eyes, I wasn't a man. I was a paycheck with shoes. It happened in a room full of laughter. That's how betrayal often begins, not with shouting, but with laughter. Rachel had dragged me to one of her friends' dinner parties, the kind filled with people who spoke in anecdotes instead of sentences, who smiled too much, who measured worth in vacation photos and wine labels. I remember the soft jazz playing under the murmur of voices, the smell of roast chicken, the candlelight flickering across plates that cost more than a week of my groceries. I didn't want to go. I never did. But Rachel said it would help the kids see you fitting in. So I put on a clean shirt, combed my hair, and told myself to endure. Sophie and Eli came along, both dressed like they'd been dragged out of another world. Sophie's phone never left her hand. Eli wore his hoodie through dinner. Rachel didn't correct them. I didn't either. I was tired of being the only one who cared about appearances. Halfway through the evening, the host, a woman named Mara, always too curious for her own good, asked how our blended family was doing. I remember that phrase exactly, blended family, like we were ingredients in a recipe that refused to mix. Rachel smiled, said we were adjusting. Everyone nodded, pretending to understand what adjustment meant. Then Mara, trying to be playful, turned to Sophie. So, what's it like having two parents again? Sophie laughed. A short, sharp sound. Oh, he's not really my parent, she said. He's just a paycheck with shoes. The room froze for half a second. Then the kind of laughter came, the nervous kind, the kind that tries to sweep embarrassment off the table before it stains the cloth. Someone muttered, "Teenagers," and raised a glass. Rachel blushed, her eyes darting toward me. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just sat there, staring at the candle flame trembling between us, feeling something inside me twist. Not break. Not yet, but twist tight like wire. Rachel tried to smooth it over. "She's joking," she said softly, touching my arm. "You know how kids are." But Sophie wasn't joking. I could see it in her eyes, that mix of cruelty and satisfaction that only the young can conjure, when they sense weakness and press on it to feel power. I forced a smile. "Good one," I said, voice steady, hands clenched under the table where no one could see. The conversation moved on. The laughter returned. But inside me, something had shifted quietly, permanently. I stayed silent for the rest of the night, nodding at words I didn't hear, smiling at faces that blurred into the dim light. When it was time to leave, I drove home without speaking. Rachel tried to make small talk, then gave up. The kids sat in the back seat, Sophie's phone casting blue light over her smirk. Eli half asleep, oblivious. At home, Rachel kissed me goodnight, whispered, "Don't take it to heart." Then she turned off the light and slept. I lay awake. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes from being mocked in front of strangers. A public unveiling of the truth you've been trying to hide. I'd always known they saw me as a provider, not a parent, but hearing it said out loud, in front of others with laughter to seal it, turned knowledge into fact. I realized, lying there beside my sleeping wife, that to them, I was not a man. I was an account number that happened to walk and breathe. A week passed. Rachel avoided the topic. Sophie acted like nothing had happened. Eli kept to himself, eyes glued to screens, his presence as thin as smoke. Then one morning, I came downstairs and heard them talking in the kitchen. Rachel, her voice low and cautious. Sophie, indignant. Eli, silent but listening. Rachel said, "Maybe we should invite him on the trip." Sophie laughed. "Why? It'll just make everything awkward. He doesn't even like beaches." Eli muttered, "He can stay here. We'll have more fun." "Enough," Rachel said softly, but her tone lacked conviction. That was when I learned they were planning a family vacation. Florida. The word family burned when I heard it. That evening I asked Rachel about it. She hesitated, eyes down, pretending to dry a dish that was already clean. "I was going to tell you," she said. "The kids just wanted something simple. No pressure. You've been working so hard. I thought maybe you'd enjoy some quiet time here." Quiet time. That was her phrasing for exclusion. I smiled. I had become good at smiling. "Of course," I said. "Makes sense." That night, after they went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The bills, the statements, the receipts, all of it laid out like a confession written in numbers. Flights, hotel reservations, rental car deposits. My cards, my accounts, my money. They were taking my money on a family trip that didn't include me. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. The next morning, before work, I went to the bank. Took 10 minutes. I froze every joint account, canceled every card they used. I called the airline, canceled the tickets, requested a refund. The woman on the phone asked if I wanted to rebook. "No," I said. "Just return it to the payer." When I came home that evening, the suitcases were out. Rachel and the kids were packing, laughing, arguing about sunscreen and playlists. I stood in the doorway watching. Rachel turned, smiled. "You're sure you'll be okay here?" she asked. I nodded. "Absolutely." Then, quietly, I added, "All expenses are yours now. After all, it's your family trip." Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" I set my wallet on the table, opened it, and took out the canceled cards. Everything connected to my account is frozen. The tickets, the hotel, all refunded. If you still want to go, you'll have to pay for it yourselves. The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Sophie blinked, confused. You can't do that. I just did. Rachel's voice rose. This isn't fair. We made plans. I shrugged. You made plans. Without me. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Eli stood there, motionless, caught between anger and disbelief. Sophie muttered something under her breath. A curse? Maybe, or just a name she saved for me when she thought I couldn't hear. I turned and walked out to the porch. The evening air was cold, wet with mist. Behind me, their voices erupted. Rachel's frustration, Sophie's outrage, Eli's confusion. A chorus of indignation from the same mouths that had given me silence for months. I stood there listening to it, the sound of dependency colliding with entitlement. And for the first time in years, I felt calm. Inside, the storm built. Rachel came out eventually, trembling with fury, tears glinting in the porch light. You embarrassed me, she hissed. You embarrassed all of us. I looked at her. No, I said. You did that at dinner last week. She froze. Her lips parted, then closed again. She turned and went back inside. Later, the house went quiet. I sat on the porch until dawn, the sky turning pale over the trees. Somewhere behind me, I heard Sophie crying, Rachel whispering comfort, Eli pacing. None of them came out to face me. The next morning, the calls started, the airline, the hotel, the rental agency. Each one confirming the cancellations, each one reminding me, in polite corporate tones, that I was no longer paying for a life that excluded me. And with every confirmation, the weight on my chest lifted a little more. For years, I had thought that love meant endurance, surviving humiliation after humiliation for the sake of something larger than myself. But that night, as I stood on the porch watching the sunrise, I understood the truth. Endurance is just another word for self-betrayal when no one notices your pain. I had built a family on debt, emotional and financial, and finally the balance was due. Inside, Rachel's phone kept ringing. Sophie shouted about ruined plans. Eli asked if there was a way to fix it. There wasn't. For the first time, I had chosen myself over them. And it terrified them, because they had mistaken my generosity for obligation. Now they would learn the difference. When the silence came, it didn't fall all at once. It arrived in layers. First, the laughter stopped echoing down the hallway. Then the questions faded. Then, finally, even the small sounds, the clinking of dishes, the quiet music Rachel liked in the evenings, dissolved into the walls. I used to believe a family's heartbeat was sound. Voices overlapping, feet on stairs, doors opening and closing. But the heart can stop long before anyone dies. For 2 days after the canceled trip, I barely saw them. The house moved without me. Rachel worked late, the kids stayed in their rooms, and every room felt like a closed book. I ate standing at the counter, the refrigerator humming like an indifferent witness. Something inside me had gone still. Not anger, not triumph, just stillness. On the third morning, I woke to the phone ringing. The old landline, the one we kept for emergencies. The sound was thin, metallic, like a warning bell. I hesitated before answering. Hello, a voice I didn't recognize at first. Polite, professional, rehearsed. Sir, this is the Lakeside Inn. I'm calling to confirm the payment for your family's reservation. It appears the card on file isn't valid. Would you like to provide another? For a moment I couldn't speak. The absurdity of it, the word family spoken so effortlessly, pressed against my chest. No, I said finally. There won't be a stay. Tell them the reservation's been released. The clerk paused. Are you sure? They were quite eager to arrive. I'm sure. When I hung up, I stood for a long time staring at the receiver, its faint hum filling the room. Somewhere deep in the house, I heard Rachel's footsteps, then the muffled sound of her phone vibrating. A minute later, her voice, raised, sharp, then lower, pleading. I didn't listen. There's a strange mercy in silence. It doesn't forgive, It simply refuses to argue. I made coffee, carried it out to the porch, and watched the morning mist rise off the trees. The air smelled of rain and cedar, clean and indifferent. By afternoon, the house was heavy with tension. Doors opened and closed harder than necessary. Sophie walked past me without a glance. Eli lingered at the doorway, as if he wanted to speak but didn't know how. Rachel came last. Her voice was thin, frayed at the edges. "You could have told me," she said. "I just did," I replied. "That's not what I mean." She waited for me to respond, but I didn't. Words had stopped working between us. They were currency devalued by overuse. That night, I found her in the living room surrounded by bills, receipts, fragments of a life held together by my handwriting. She looked up at me, eyes red but dry. "Is this really what you want? To make us suffer just to prove a point?" I sat down across from her. "You think this is about proof. It isn't. It's about recognition. I spent years speaking in gestures, fixing things, paying for things, trying to be visible through usefulness. And somehow that made me invisible." She shook her head. "They're just kids." "They were old enough to know what they were saying," I answered. "Old enough to know silence can wound." We sat there until the clock marked midnight. She didn't cry. Neither did I. The air between us felt like glass. Clear, sharp, impossible to touch without bleeding. In the days that followed, the house became two separate countries. On one side, Rachel, Sophie, and Eli. On the other, me. We shared walls but not language. Shared meals but not communion. Even the dog seemed confused by the borderlines. Then the first call came again. Not from the inn this time, but from Rachel herself. She had gone to her sister's for a night, taking the kids with her. It was late when she called, her voice brittle with something halfway between regret and accusation. "Do you ever think about what this is doing to them?" "I think about what it did to me," I said. She sighed, the sound full of distance. "They don't understand. They just feel punished." I closed my eyes. They're not being punished. They're being shown the edge of things. Every kindness has won. I reached mine. "Maybe you're proud of that," she said quietly. "But all I hear is a man who gave up." Her words found their mark. Because she was right, I had given up. Not out of hatred, but out of exhaustion. After she hung up, I walked through the empty house. Their rooms smelled faintly of them. Sophie's perfume, Eli's sneakers, the sugary fog of adolescence. I stood in each doorway like a stranger touring someone else's home. The silence was complete now, and within it, I began to hear myself again. I started noticing small things. The way light shifted across the floorboards, the creak of the stairs, the sound of rain against the gutters I had fixed months before. The house no longer resisted me. It was as if, in their absence, the walls had finally recognized who kept them standing. That realization came with no joy, only clarity. I hadn't built a family. I had built shelter for them, from them, around them. And maybe that was all I was ever meant to do. A week later, Rachel returned. Alone. The kids had chosen to stay with friends for a while. She stood in the kitchen doorway, hair damp from rain, eyes hollow. "It's strange," she said. "How quiet it gets when you finally get what you want." "I didn't want quiet," I said. "I wanted peace." "Is there a difference?" I thought for a long moment. "Peace doesn't ask to be noticed." She looked at me like I was someone she used to know, then nodded once and went upstairs. That night I dreamed of the house without walls. Just a roof suspended over air, everything exposed, nothing hidden. When I woke, I understood. That's what love without respect becomes. A roof with no foundation, shelter that shelters no one. In the morning, the phone rang again. I let it. It rang until it stopped. I poured another cup of coffee and sat on the porch, the mist rising once more. I thought about Rachel, the kids, the years I had spent trying to earn something that could never be bought or built. I wondered if they would ever call again. If they did, I didn't know whether I'd answer. Because sometimes silence isn't revenge. The last weeks moved like winter water. Slow on the surface, bitter underneath. I stopped talking unless I had to. Not a vow, just a habit. Words had become a currency spent to prove I existed. I was done buying proof. I woke before dawn, made coffee, and walked the perimeter of the house I had corrected nail by nail. I watched the cedar darken with rain and the gutters carry what the sky couldn't hold. The house worked. I did too. The family did not. Rachel came and went like fog across the yard. We shared doorways without touching. She folded laundry the way a nurse folds a sheet. Efficient, impersonal, unafraid of the cold. We were two technicians maintaining a failing machine. We knew which valves to turn. We knew which noises meant we had a few more hours before something seized. We didn't ask for miracles. We asked for silence. We got it. The kids returned in fragments. Sophie for a jacket, Eli for a charger. Crossing the threshold like visitors who remembered an alarm code. They didn't look at me. I didn't follow them with my eyes, though I heard everything. The zipper yanked too hard, the dresser drawer slammed, the soft apology to their mother, always whispered, never earned. I kept my hands flat on the table and traced the grain with my thumb until the wood felt like a map of every wrong turn I had taken. One night, rain stuttered on the roof and then stopped. The gaps between drops felt louder than the storm. Rachel stood at the sink holding a glass she didn't drink from. She asked a question without looking up. "Are you staying?" I let the question hang. It swung between us like a bulb on a thin wire. I watched it sway. I listened to the small creak it made in the ceiling. "For now," I said. "A mercy. Or a delay." Even I couldn't tell. The next morning, a letter slid through the mail slot. No stamp, no address, just a folded page in Sophie's deliberate hand. She wrote that she didn't mean the thing she said at Mara's table, not really, not like that, not the way it sounded when everyone laughed and the candles made everything look crueler. She said words were slippery. She said she was 16. She said if I wanted, she could delete the photos of the phone I bought and pretend it came from no one. I reread that part until the ink softened under my finger. I didn't reply. I put the letter back in the envelope and set it under the salt shaker. When she came by later to retrieve it, face careful, voice steady, I watched her slide it into her bag and told myself I had made a boundary. Felt like a burial. Eli tried next, in his way. He hovered in the garage while I adjusted the squeal out of a door. He asked about torque. He asked about rust. He didn't ask about me. I handed him a wrench and let him miss the thread twice. On the third try, the bolt seated cleanly with a small grateful sound. He looked at me, startled by success. I nodded once, then went inside. We invented a language made only of tools. It was the best we'd ever done. Rachel avoided arguments the way sailors avoid naming storms. She cooked less, cleaned more, and spent evenings reading with a pen in her hand, underlining sentences that felt like instructions for living without the person across the room. Once, she underlined a line and then circled it twice. I didn't ask what it said. I didn't want to know the exact measurements of my absence. On a Sunday, I opened every window and let cold air walk the hallways. The house breathed like something freed. Curtains lifted and fell. Doors shifted on hinges I had reset to plumb. A stranger passing by would have said the place felt loved. A stranger would have been almost right. I started packing the least visible parts of myself. The old work boots under the stairs, the jacket with the torn cuff, the drill bits no one else knew how to sort. I left the obvious things, the man-shaped outline that reassures a household it is not alone. When the box lids closed, they didn't thud. They sighed. I made a list of what I had built here. Not just shelves and railings, but smaller, unglamorous salvations. The way the bathroom door now closed without a hip check. The window that no longer rattled at 3 a.m. The section of fence that would survive a winter wind. A quiet ledger, paid in hours no one remembers. I didn't show the list to anyone. I folded it into a pocket I no longer wore. Rachel finally said the word "we" like a person testing a step over deep water. She asked if we could talk. Not about money, not about travel, but about how to reset the tone. I told her tones don't reset. They decay. Then they settle. She frowned, as if I had handed her a math problem with no numbers. She said she missed me. I said I had been here the whole time. We both knew that wasn't true. Sophie texted Rachel from the next room asking if I was angry or just distant. Rachel showed me her phone without comment. Anger is loud. Distant is useful. I chose useful. Keeps a roof from falling. We tried a dinner. The four of us. Real plates. Real napkins. A truce dressed as a meal. I grilled salmon and burned it by 1 minute because I was listening to the fork against Sophie's plate like it was Morse code. Eli asked for salt he didn't use. Rachel told a story about a neighbor's dog. I laughed at the wrong time. No one corrected me. Afterward, we carried our plates to the sink and washed in silence, our shoulders almost touching, almost not. I left the last glass to air dry and went outside. The sky was the color of unspoken apologies. The porch boards held the heat from the day like a kept secret. I sat at the edge where the first step begins and thought about momentum, how families fall the way objects do, pulled by laws they think they can negotiate. You can slow the drop. You can't cancel it. When the neighbor's porch light snapped on, I realized how long I had been sitting. I went back in. The house smelled faintly of lemon soap and a fire that never quite started. Rachel waited at the table with the folder I had once used for warranties and permits. She had filled it with photographs. Not of me, of the kids, of vacations I hadn't taken, of birthdays that arrived before I did. She pushed the folder toward me and said, "This is what I was guarding." I ran a hand over the cover and felt nothing. Paper is not a shield. It's an archive. "I don't want a museum," I said. "I wanted a room. Small. Lived in. Mine." She looked at the doorway like it had become a verdict. "Do you think there's a way back?" "There's a way forward," I said. "It just doesn't go through me." The next day I took down the shelf above the washer and patched the holes. No one ever liked that shelf. It hit people in the head when they stood too fast. I had built it anyway, convinced storage would solve what distance could not. I sanded the patch smooth, painted the square, and stepped back. The wall looked unbroken. That felt like a lie I could finally permit. When Sophie came by for a coat, she stood in the laundry room and touched the paint. "It's cleaner," she said. "It's simpler," I answered. She nodded, a tiny motion like a hinge finding its place. "I'm learning," she said, almost to herself. She left without the coat. Eli texted a picture of a bolt he had set correctly. No words. I sent a thumbs up. He replied with a single period. A sentence without a claim. It was somehow perfect. On the last evening, I gathered what remained of my tools and left the hammer on the counter. A house should keep at least one tool for emergencies. I wrote a note. For loose things. I didn't sign it. My handwriting did that for me. Rachel met me on the porch as the light dissolved. "You're not punishing us?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm finishing my part." She pressed her lips together like a person bracing for a wave. "What do I tell them?" "Tell them the roof is sound," I said. "Tell them the doors will close. Tell them a man was here, and everything he touched now works the way it was supposed to." She shook her head. "That isn't the same as love." "No," I said. "It's what remains when love is refused." I walked to the curb and set the last box down. It didn't feel heavy. That worried me more than if it had crushed my hands. From the sidewalk, the house looked like it did when I first arrived. Small, stubborn, hopeful in the way certain broken things are. A porch light I had rewired hummed. The door hung straight. The gutter elbows pointed the right way. The place would hold. Sophie's letter was still in my pocket. I took it out and read the last line again. "I didn't mean to make you feel like no one." I folded it carefully and placed it beneath the doormat. A small promise that could survive a season. Eli's text sat on my phone. The tiny dot of his period like a nail head flush with wood. "Good work, son, I didn't send. Good work anyway." Rachel stood in the doorway with her arms held close. Not crossed, not open. A neutral saint. A witness. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know," I answered. "Me too." Then I stepped back until the house became outline and the outline became memory. I didn't look away. You shouldn't look away from the thing you once called home. I left the street in the same quiet I had tried to live by. Not a slam. Not a speech. Just a man moving through air he no longer needed permission to breathe. The night didn't argue. It received me. Was I wrong to leave the love but finish the work? Or is this all a stepfather ever gets? Walls that hold, doors that close, and a final question no one in that house will answer? It's the only language left for those who have been unheard too long.